The smell of diesel and human sweat had become the same thing. 48 men breathed the same air inside U-474, a Type WWII submarine that had been their home for 6 weeks. They had not seen the sun in 4 days. They had not tasted fresh food in 3. The war was somewhere above them, on the surface of the North Atlantic, but down here in the darkness, the war was simply waiting. Captain Lieutenant Werner Brandt pressed his eye to the periscope and rotated slowly. Gray sky. Gray water. Nothing. He had done this 1,000 times. He would do it 1,000 more. This was spring 1943, and the Battle of the Atlantic had become a war of patience. German U-boats hunted Allied convoys carrying food, fuel, and weapons from America to Britain. If they could sink enough ships, Britain would starve. That was the theory. The reality was more complicated. Brandt was 31 years old. He had commanded U-474 for 2 years and completed 12 war patrols. In the beginning, the hunting had been easy. Allied ships crossed the ocean with little protection. U-boats gathered in groups called wolf packs and attacked at night, on the surface, where their low silhouettes made them invisible. They had sunk millions of tons of shipping. They had called it the happy time. The happy time was over. Brandt lowered the periscope and climbed down into the control room. His first watch officer, Oberleutnant Friedrich Lehmann, stood at the navigation table. Lehmann was 24, with the face of a schoolboy and the eyes of a man who had seen too much. He kept letters in his jacket pocket, letters to his fiancée that he could not send. He added to them every night. Anything? Lehmann asked. Empty sea. Perhaps that is good. Brandt did not answer. Empty sea meant no targets. But it also meant no enemy. The Allies had changed their tactics. They now sent long-range aircraft from bases in Iceland and Canada. These planes could find submarines on the surface and attack before the U-boats could dive. 3 boats from their wolf pack had already disappeared. No distress signals. No survivors picked up. Just silence where voices used to be. The submarine's chief engineer, Stabsobermaskinist Otto Vogel, emerged from the engine room wiping his hands on a rag. Vogel was 45, the oldest man aboard. He had served in the Kaiser's navy during the last war. He knew machines the way a doctor knows bodies. He could hear problems before they appeared. Starboard diesel is running hot, Vogel reported. I can keep it working, but she needs a shipyard. We all need things we cannot have, Brandt said. Vogel nodded and returned to his engines. He understood. They were 800 miles from the nearest friendly port. The submarine would survive or it would not. Complaints changed nothing. That I in the forward torpedo room, Lieutenant Karl Meyer sat on a bunk and tried to steady his breathing. Meyer was 22, fresh from the submarine school in Kiel. This was his first war patrol. He had trained for this. He had memorized the manuals. But nothing had prepared him for the reality, the cramped spaces, the constant fear, the knowledge that a single depth charge could turn this steel tube into a tomb. His hands would not stop shaking. An older sailor noticed and sat beside him. First time is always hard, the man said. You think every sound is death coming for you. After a while, you learn which sounds matter and which do not. How long does that take? The sailor shrugged. If you survive long enough, you will know. That night, U-474 surfaced to charge its batteries. The diesel engines roared to life, sucking in fresh air through the open hatch. Brandt climbed to the conning tower and felt the cold wind on his face. Above him, the stars burned bright and indifferent. Somewhere to the east, Britain waited. Somewhere to the west, America built ships and trained soldiers. The war machine on both sides grew larger every day. The hydrophone operator's voice came through the speaking tube. Herkelu. Contact. Multiple propeller sounds. Bearing northwest. Brandt raised his binoculars. He saw nothing yet. But sound traveled far underwater. The convoy was coming that he climbed back down and gathered his officers around the chart table. 4 pencil marks showed the positions of the other Wolf Pack submarines. They would coordinate their attack by radio, short, coded bursts that the enemy might detect but could not decode quickly enough. "Gentlemen," Brant said, "we have found our prey. We attack after midnight." The men moved to their stations. The submarine turned northwest, running on the surface to close the distance. Inside the hull, torpedoes waited in their tubes like sleeping sharks. Werner Brandt stood alone in the control room and listened to the sounds of his boat, the hum of electricity, the breathing of men, the heartbeat of war. He thought about the ships he would sink tonight. He thought about the men who would die in the cold water. He did not pray. He had stopped praying long ago. Instead, he simply waited for the darkness to do its work. The torpedo struck the freighter just below the waterline, and for one terrible moment, the entire Atlantic Ocean seemed to hold its breath. Then came the explosion, a column of fire that turned night into day and split the ship's hull like a man breaking bread. Werner Brandt watched through his binoculars as the vessel began to die. It was 3 hours past midnight. U-474 had attacked from the surface, as doctrine demanded. The Wolf Pack had coordinated perfectly. 4 submarines striking from 4 directions. The convoy's escort destroyers could not protect everything at once. In the chaos of flares, explosions, and desperate radio calls, the U-boats found their targets. Brandt's target had been a large cargo ship riding low in the water, 10,000 tons of food, medicine, and ammunition that would never reach Britain. He had calculated the firing solution himself. Speed, distance, angle of approach. Mathematics reduced to murder. 2 torpedoes from the bow tubes. Both hits. Now he watched men jumping from the burning deck into water cold enough to kill in minutes. Their screams carried across the waves. Some waved their arms. Some simply disappeared beneath the black surface. The freighter's bow rose toward the stars as her stern filled with water. She would be gone in 10 minutes. Hercule. Lehman's voice was flat. Destroyers turning toward us. Brandt lowered his binoculars. Clear the bridge. Prepare to dive. The crew moved with practiced speed. Men dropped through hatches. Valves opened. The submarine's bow tilted downward as she slid beneath the waves. Brandt was the last man down, pulling the hatch closed above him as seawater began to wash over the conning tower. Take her to 100 meters, he ordered. Silent running. The electric motors hummed softly. The diesel engines were off now. They needed air to run, and there was no air underwater. The submarine descended into darkness and silence. 48 men held their breath and listened. The first depth charge exploded 200 meters away. The shock wave hit U-474 like a giant's fist. Light bulbs shattered. Men stumbled against machinery. A pipe burst in the engine room, spraying cold seawater across the deck. Damage report, Brandt said calmly. Vogel's voice came from the aft compartment. Minor flooding. I can handle it. More explosions followed. The destroyers were dropping patterns now, multiple charges set to detonate at different depths, creating overlapping zones of destruction. The submarine shook and groaned. Paint flakes fell from the ceiling like snow. In the forward compartment, Karl Meyer gripped a support beam and tried not to scream. Each explosion sent a sound through the hull that was not just heard but felt, a deep, terrible vibration that rattled teeth and blurred vision. He had read about depth charge attacks in training. Reading was nothing like this. An older sailor grabbed his arm. Breathe, the man said. Slowly. If you panic, you use more air. If you use more air, we all die sooner. Meyer forced himself to breathe. In. Out. In. Out. The explosions continued, but they seemed farther now. The destroyers were moving away, searching in the wrong direction. They have lost us, Lehman whispered. Brandt shook his head. Not lost. They are listening. waiting for us to make a sound. For 2 hours, U-474 drifted at 100 meters. No one spoke above a whisper. Men communicated with hand signals. Even footsteps were forbidden, the crew removed their boots and walked in socks. Sound was the enemy now. A dropped wrench, a cough, a careless word could bring the destroyers back. Finally, the propeller sounds faded into silence. Brant ordered a slow ascent. When the periscope broke the surface, he saw empty ocean. The convoy had moved on. The destroyers had given up the hunt. They had survived, but the freighter was gone. Only debris remained, wooden crates, life jackets, an empty lifeboat overturned. No survivors. The cold water had done its work. Brant ordered the submarine to remain submerged until dawn. He retreated to his cabin, a space no larger than a closet, with a curtain for a door. He sat on his bunk and opened his war diary. His hand was steady as he wrote, March 2, 1943. Convoy attack. One freighter sunk, approximately 10,000 tons. 2 torpedo hits. Ship observed sinking. Crew abandoned vessel. No survivors observed. He paused. The official language felt hollow. It said nothing about the screaming men in the water. It said nothing about how their voices had carried across the waves, growing weaker until they stopped entirely. It said nothing about the cold mathematics of war, how many men died so that Britain might go hungry for one more day. Werner Brandt closed his diary and sat in the darkness. He was a professional. He followed orders. He did not question the necessity of what he had done, but he knew those screams would follow him for the rest of his life. However long that might be. 3 days after the convoy attack, the war changed forever. Werner Brandt saw it happen through 8 inches of glass and steel, and in that moment, he understood that everything he had been told was a lie. U-474 had spent those 3 days making repairs. The depth charge attack had damaged the starboard diesel engine, cracked 2 pressure gauges, and shattered the glass on the navigation compass. Vogel and his engineers worked around the clock, improvising solutions with whatever materials they had. They welded patches over cracks. They replaced broken parts with spares that were themselves half-worn. They kept the submarine alive through skill and stubbornness. The Wolf Pack had reformed, for boats now, down from 6. U-612, commanded by Brandt's friend from the Naval Academy, had survived. U-339 and U-518 were gone. No distress calls. No explanation. Just 2 more names crossed off the roster. New orders arrived by coded radio transmission. Another convoy had been spotted heading east from America. The remaining submarines were to intercept and attack. Headquarters promised reinforcements. Headquarters always promised reinforcements. On the morning of the 4th day, Brandt took the periscope watch. The sea was calm. The sky was gray. Visibility was good, too good, perhaps. Clear weather meant Allied aircraft could see further. He rotated the periscope slowly, scanning the horizon in a full circle, then he stopped. He adjusted the focus. He looked again. His heart began to pound. "Layman," he said quietly. "Come here." The first watch officer climbed up to the periscope station. Brandt stepped aside and let him look. He watched Lehman's face go pale. "My God," Lehman whispered, "ships. More ships than either of them had ever seen." They stretched across the horizon from north to south, a line of vessels so long that the ends disappeared into the haze. Brandt counted quickly. 30. 40. 50 ships, perhaps more. And these were not warships. These were cargo vessels. Liberty ships. American-built freighters designed to be produced quickly and cheaply. Each one carried thousands of tons of supplies, and around them, like wolves guarding sheep that had become too numerous to count, escort destroyers and corvettes patrolled in formation. Above them, aircraft circled, small dark shapes against the gray clouds. "That is impossible," Lehman said. We sank a convoy 3 days ago. Where did all these ships come from? Brant knew the answer. He had read the intelligence reports. The Americans had built new shipyards on both coasts. They had developed assembly line techniques that could produce a complete Liberty ship in weeks. The German High Command had dismissed these reports as propaganda. No nation could build ships that fast. The German High Command had been wrong. Brant ordered the other officers to look. One by one, they climbed to the periscope and saw the future approaching. Young Meyer stared so long that Brant had to pull him away. The boy's face was white. His hands shook worse than ever. There are so many, Meyer said. How can we fight so many? No one answered. There was no answer. Brant tried to contact the other submarines by radio. Static hissed and crackled. Finally, a voice broke through. U-612, his friend's boat. Werner. Are you seeing what I am seeing? I see it. A long pause. The radio hummed with empty space. Then, what do we do? Brant looked around the control room. His men watched him. They trusted him. They had followed him through a dozen patrols, through storms and depth charges and the endless gray sameness of the Atlantic. They were waiting for him to give an order that made sense of what they had just witnessed, that he could attack. One submarine against 50 ships and a dozen escorts. They might sink one vessel before the destroyers found them. They would not survive the counterattack. That he could retreat. Report the sighting to headquarters. Let someone else decide what to do. He made his choice. We shadow them, he said. We stay at maximum safe distance. We observe and report. Headquarters needs to know what is coming. The order felt like surrender. Perhaps it was. But Werner Brant was responsible for 48 lives. He would not spend them for nothing. U-474 turned east, following the convoy at the edge of visibility. The Liberty ships moved steadily toward Britain, carrying enough supplies to feed an army for months. Behind them, in the gray water, a single German submarine watched and waited. Brant stood at the periscope for hours, unable to look away. Each ship that passed was proof of a simple truth. Germany was not fighting a navy. Germany was fighting the entire industrial capacity of the United States. And against that enemy, submarines and torpedoes and courage were not enough. The war, he realized, was already lost. They just had not finished dying yet. The aircraft found them at dawn. A twin-engine bomber appeared out of the clouds without warning, and Werner Brant had exactly 12 seconds to make the decision that would determine whether his crew lived or died. He chose to dive. U-474 plunged beneath the waves as the aircraft roared overhead. Bombs exploded in the water behind them, not depth charges, but aerial bombs that detonated on impact. The shock waves pushed the submarine deeper, faster. Men tumbled against bulkheads. Lights flickered. Somewhere in the engine room, metal screamed. They had been shadowing the convoy for 18 hours. Brant had transmitted his report to headquarters. The response had been a single word: acknowledged. No new orders. No reinforcements. Just silence from a command structure that had no answers left. Now the convoy's escorts knew exactly where U-474 was hiding. The aircraft had marked their position with smoke floats. Destroyers were already turning toward them, their propellers churning the water above. Take her to 150 meters, Brant ordered. All ahead slow. The submarine descended into the darkness. At this depth, the pressure squeezed the hull. Steel groaned. Rivets creaked. Every man aboard knew that the boat was designed to survive 200 meters. Beyond that was theory. Beyond that was hope. The first depth charge pattern fell at 0630. 20 explosions bracketed the submarine in a cage of sound and fury. The concussions threw men to the deck. Pipes burst. Water sprayed into the control room. In the engine room, a valve shattered, and scalding steam poured into the compartment. 2 engineers died instantly. Vogel was burned across his hands and face. but he refused to leave his station. He wrapped his wounds with rags and kept working, adjusting valves and monitoring gauges through eyes that could barely see. "We cannot take much more," Lehman shouted over the chaos. Brant knew. The submarine was dying around him. He could hear it in the sounds she made, the desperate groaning of a steel beast pushed beyond its limits. He could see it in the faces of his men, the exhaustion, the fear, the resignation. Another pattern fell. Closer this time. The lights went out completely. Emergency lanterns flickered to life, casting red shadows across the control room. Men looked like ghosts. Perhaps they were. Young Meyer appeared at Brant's side. The boy's uniform was soaked with seawater and someone else's blood. His hands had finally stopped shaking. There was no room for fear anymore. There was only the work of survival. "The forward torpedo room is flooding," Meyer reported. "We have sealed the compartment, but we are losing buoyancy." Brant made a decision. "Blow the forward tanks. Bring us up to periscope depth." "They will see us," Lehman protested. "They already know where we are. Staying deep will only delay the inevitable." He looked around the control room at the men who had followed him for 2 years. Some had been with him since the beginning. Others had joined just months ago. All of them were looking at him now, waiting. "Gentlemen," he said, "we have 2 choices. We surface and surrender. Or we stay down and die together. I will not make this decision alone." Silence. The submarine groaned. Water dripped from burst pipes. Vogel's voice came from the engine room, weak but clear. "I did not survive the last war to drown in this one." Surface. One by one, the others nodded. Lehman. Meyer. The helmsman, the radio operator, the torpedo men. They wanted to live. There was no shame in that. Brant gave the order. Surface. Prepare white flags. U-474 rose from the depths for the last time. When she broke through the waves, an American destroyer was waiting less than 500 meters away. Sailors lined the rails with weapons ready. A voice came over a loudspeaker in broken German, "Abandon ship. You will be rescued. Do not resist." The crew climbed out of the hatches and stood on the deck in the morning sunlight. Brant had not felt the sun on his face in weeks. It seemed impossibly bright. Around them, the Liberty ships continued their steady march toward Britain. 50 ships. 100,000 tons of cargo. The proof that this war had already been decided. A launch from the destroyer came alongside. American sailors helped the German crew aboard. They were efficient, professional, not unkind. One young American offered Brant a cigarette. Brant took it. They did not share a language, but they understood each other. They were both tired. They were both far from home. As the launch pulled away, U-474 settled lower in the water. Vogel had opened the sea cocks before leaving. The submarine would sink on her own terms, not as a prize for the enemy. Brant watched her go down, the boat that had been his home, his weapon, his coffin that he had somehow escaped. The Liberty ships disappeared over the horizon. Werner Brant stood on the American destroyer and watched them go. He thought of his crew, the 31 men who had survived, the 17 who had not. He thought of the freighter he had sunk 3 days ago and the men who had screamed in the water. The war would continue without him. Germany would fight for 2 more years before the end. Thousands more would die on both sides. But Werner Brant had seen the future on that gray morning. He had counted the ships that America could build faster than U-boats could sink, and he knew, with terrible certainty, that the Battle of the Atlantic was already over. The submarines had lost. They had simply not finished dying yet.